as Holly said, I am originally from Perth, Australia. I came to New York almost 20 years ago. I did my master's at NYU, and that master's was in musical theater writing. And while I was studying music theater writing, I also knew that I really wanted to be a musical director. And so for the following 20 years, which takes us up to now, I guess, I've sort of been trying to lead these two parallel lives as a music director, arranger, supervisor, and as a composer and someone who's working on my own music. And quite often it's one path that's much more direct, and then the other one creeps up, and I get to do a little bit of composing here and there. But so I wear many hats, and one of those hats is as a vocal arranger. And none of those above skills are mutually exclusive, as I'm sure you all know, and I'm sure you all similarly wear many hats too. The first thing I want to say is that there are no right or wrong answers to vocal arranging. I basically taught myself how to do it. I was thrown an opportunity. I didn't even know that I was vocal arranging as I was doing it. I was just writing some harmonies for some songs that someone else wrote, and suddenly I was given the title of vocal arranger. And that was on the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. So one of the songs that we'll take a look at tonight is one of my first arrangements from a song in that show, and I will show you that I made many mistakes. And there are also some things that I'm really happy with and that I'm proud of. But having said that, there are no right answers. There are tips and tricks that I can share with you that I've figured out myself over the years, and I've now done many shows since Spelling Bee, and every show is a different animal. So it's great as any artist, but especially as an arranger, to be flexible and to draw from a really wide palette of tools, or palette of paints, I guess. I'm not trying to mix my metaphors here. So I'll take you through 3 or 4 different examples a little bit later, but I first just want to go through and talk about basically what my checklist is when I'm starting out a vocal arrangement. And like I said, the very first vocal arrangement I did, or an official vocal arrangement, was on somebody else's music. So it was William Finn, and he gave me a melody and a lyric. And that was something that he had created. So it was his baby, essentially. And as an arranger, your job is to bring both your own voice and your own creativity to the piece that you're working on, but also elevate the person's voice that you are collaborating with. And the difference is, of course, when you are writing your own piece, and it's a gray area. Do you vocal arrange your own piece, or are you just composing? That's all part of your own voice. So it depends on your project. You may have a different way of using your skills, but I will talk you through what my different experiences are. I'm going to share a few examples of compositions that I did not write, but where I contributed vocal arrangements, and then I will share a piece from my own musical renaissance where I also did the vocal arrangements. So vocal, I'm just gonna actually, so I'm an artist, not a tech person, so forgive me as I move my different screens around. I will screen share in a little bit with you guys, but I just want to talk about concept first. So let me just pull my notes up. Okay, vocal arranging, it's more than writing just harmonies. You are there to use the vocal ensemble to help tell the story further and to theatricalize the score. I like to think of it as exploding a score. You guys may have heard the podcast and seen the TV show Song Exploder, that's what I like to think my job is as a vocal arranger. I take whatever the nut of the idea is, and then I just try to expand it as much as possible and as much as is appropriate. And by the way, so this is, I think we all know that this is, I'm talking about vocal arranging for musical theater here, but I've also done a lot of vocal arranging for rock bands and pop bands, and it's a little bit of a different scenario, but there is some crossover too. So I'll talk a little bit about that going on, but mostly I'm talking about musical theater. So as the vocal arranger and as one of the artists on the creative team, when you're starting a project, you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve? What is the mood of this particular moment? What are the characters that you are helping to introduce the audience to? Or who are these people, and can you differentiate these characters from each other in your arranging? Are you helping to propel the story forward in this song? Are you there to just elevate the mood? So there are all of these things. You should have an answer to all of them. The nitty gritty of starting out an arrangement, a very practical thing. I use Finale as my notation software, and I will begin with the original melody and piano part. For example, if in Spelling Bee, the song Magic Foot, William Finn has sung the melody and he's played a piano part. And so all I have are those 3 staves, the 1 vocal line and then the 2 piano staves. I almost always will then add an additional piano staff into Finale. That way I can create block chords, and I can look at different voicings in one compact area. Occasionally I will say I'm arranging for 6 other voices in that song. The other way to do it would be to create 6 individual vocal lines, but I find that can get a little overwhelming because you're constantly having to look vertically, not horizontally. So I like to start small and then build on that and expand the arrangement. So a visual cue will really help me in a second piano staff. I actually have a little example I will screen share with you guys. Let's see. Okay, share screen. Wish me luck. All right, give me a thumbs up. Do you guys see? Of course, now I can't see anyone on Zoom, but okay, yeah, thumbs up. Oh, great. All right, are you seeing a big PDF here? Yep. Okay, great. Here is an example of a recent vocal arrangement that I did from the new musical called The Notebook. Ingrid Michaelson has written the music, and she and I are collaborating on the vocal arrangements. You'll see that here's the piano accompaniment, here's the melody, and that's how I began creating this Finale file. And I actually, as the music supervisor of this show, have been transcribing all of the music into Finale, so it helps when I'm sort of doing all of it at once. But if you have an assistant or if somebody is helping you create a chart, this is one of the ways to do it. Because her vocal arrangements are pretty intricate, I want to see what all the women are doing and what all the men are doing. I don't want to spread out too many staves all at once. So I have just created this staff group. And this is actually pretty common for a lot of vocal arrangements. I will just have the women on the top and the men on the bottom. And then over here, you'll see that I just do a split soprano and alto and then tenor and bari. And this arrangement actually happens to be in unison, but you will see as we go on, for example, here, I'll start to split. And so it's pretty clear that this is soprano, this is alto, then the guys are still unison. And then here, for example, it's a pretty easy four-part split. And when your music director is teaching those parts, they're very easy to play together. That's the other thing to keep in mind. If you want to have a pretty expedited and efficient rehearsal process, think of how you can notate to make that so. It's much, much easier to read this on the piano than it would be to read one separate soprano line, one separate alto, one separate tenor, and one separate baritone. So try to condense when you can. And then there will be times where there'll be a counterpoint line, and it's not going to be as easy to read just when it's stacked. So for example, down here, you see I've got the baritones, stems down on this. Actually, look, I didn't use the correct clef, so I got to go in and fix that. But I have them singing this line, da 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 da, and the vocal part above is just holding whole notes. So it's, you know, you use your best judgment as to what is legible. You'll see in my spelling bee score that I'm about to share, I didn't always make it completely legible, and I still get random Facebook messages from people saying, what exactly did you mean on bar 63 of Pandemonium? I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry, I didn't know what I was doing back then. So if you're not sure when notating your vocal arrangement, ask a music director, or ask someone who'll be teaching those parts and playing the piano part. Never be ashamed or afraid of asking questions. Okay, so back to some more nitty-gritty stuff. Vocal arranges. So this is not a hard and fast rule. This is what I basically use in my own arrangements, and just through my experience of working with vocalists, what the most effective ranges are. You have these, so I'd say the basic run-of-the-mill vocal arrangement, I'm going to use these vocal ranges. So the sopranos from the C to the G, alto from the G to the D, tenors from the C to the high A, baritones from the A to the E. And I will point out that it seems that musical theater ensemble writing doesn't seem to include basses so much anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have people who are legitimate basses, but I think a lot of it is to do with the style of music that's being written for Broadway now. A lot of it is the training. People are coming out of these singing programs and acting programs, and they're just being trained to sing higher and higher and higher. There are very few like solid bass and like actual baritone voices. You find a lot more baritone voices now. So for the most part, I'm not writing a part for basses. I'm writing for baris or baritenors. And obviously you may find yourself writing an arrangement and you have basses, and if that's the case, then great, and you take advantage of that. But this is when I'm just asked to write a show that hasn't been cast yet, and I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be your standard Broadway sound. These are the ranges that I will look at. If something is more of a classical legit sound, then the ranges are a little like soprano, depending who you have. I mean, you may have trained sopranos who can sing up to a high C. This one is interesting. If it's a pop rock belt kind of score, you don't want ladies belting up to that high A there. Okay, so I pretty much try to have them get to an E, maybe an F, depending on where the placement of the note is going to be and what the dynamic is of that moment. But just know that if you have these really strong belters, that sound is going to be huge if they're belting that high E. Same thing, like belters, altos who are belting a B is going to be so strong. Tenors belting an A is going to be a massive sound. Same with baritones and barytenors. So if everyone was belting at these exact 4 notes at the same time, you're going to have an incredibly powerful chord. It would be a crunchy chord, but it'd be a nice chord actually. So anyway, you guys may know all this too, so forgive me if I'm going back a little, but I just want to talk you through my process. I still think about this as I'm writing arrangements. So let's just pop back up. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. We'll get back to that. Stop share. Okay. So you want to think in that particular, so say if you're looking at an overall score, an entire Broadway score, every song is going to be different, obviously. The vocal arrangement is going to have a different purpose. Be very aware of all of the different colors that your vocalists can achieve. And again, that range chart I just shared with you, that is going to be your friend when you think about how dramatic is this moment, how ethereal is this moment, how sad is this moment, how joyous is this moment. And based on what the emotion is that you're trying to convey, you have to think about where you're placing certain notes in these singers' voices. You also must be really aware of using dynamics and notating dynamics into your score. It's one thing if the sopranos see a high D and decide to belt it, but you actually may want it to be a light, airy, floaty, breathy sound there. So not only are you going to hopefully write a dynamic marking like piano or mezzo piano, but you might want to literally write breathy or write no vibrato. There's a great vocal arranger in New York who works on Broadway and around the world, actually, Anne Marie Milazzo. And she did the vocal arrangements for Spring Awakening. She did them for If Then, which is how I met her and worked with her for the first time. She did a million different things, and she's a great composer as well. But she, when she's teaching her vocal arrangements, will literally say things like, I want this section to sound like rainbow skittles falling through the sky. Now, how do you notate that? I don't know, but you could write it on the score. You could figure out a way of conveying what you want. Don't be afraid to over mark up your score, because you may, like, look at me in spelling bee 15 years later, I have people saying, what did you mean by this? So be as specific and as clear as you can. You're not just writing notes on the page. You are writing technique, and you are writing colors, you're writing vibrato, you're writing straight tone. You have so many different effects at your fingertips in the human voice. So something I learned early on from Bill Finn, actually, is that vocal arranging is so much more than just filling out a chord. So he writes very chordally. His piano parts are very triadic. They move vertically quite often. Who just sort of write out quarter, 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 and then, I mean, he's a beautiful writer, but his piano parts are pretty straightforward. Okay, I think an early arrangement I did for him, I basically took the melody and stacked, say, 4 parts. I just expanded it for 4 parts, but I had everyone sing exactly the same rhythms, exactly the same lyrics, as if they were singing the melody, but on different notes of the triads that were in the piano part. And that's an incredibly boring vocal arrangement. There are times where that would be very effective, but for Bill Finn's music, which is quirky and fun and so joyous, he was like, oh, no. We need, I think he literally said, we need a part going do 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 la 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 la. So he taught me to think in counterpoint. And as a vocal arranger, it's okay for you to come up with other melodies. And I should say, and I should have said this at the beginning, like obviously speak to the composer that you're working with, if it's not yourself, and be on the same page about what they're envisioning for the ensemble as those people sing different vocal parts. You don't, someone like Bill Finn, I'm never going to write just a chordal block arrangement ever again. If I was writing for someone else, maybe that's what they would want, but always have that conversation. But know that those two versions are going to give you very different effects. The other thing to be aware of, another thing to be aware of, is not covering the solo line or the melodic line. And obviously dynamics will help you with that, but you don't want to distract, you don't want to take the focus away sonically from where the melody is supposed to be or the character that the audience is meant to be focusing on. And it may be that it's an ensemble moment and it's okay for everyone to be splitting their focus, but it also may be that we really want everyone's eyes on the main character and ears on the main character, and all you're doing is enhancing the emotion. So that's the thing to be aware of with counterpoint writing. There is also a lot of value in non-lyrical expression, non-lyric expression. I'm a big fan of using vowels, ooh, ah, yeah, oh, ah, do, why, the world's your oyster. You want to make sure that the way that you are using those vowels, they're not distracting from the melody. I will often find that if I'm writing a vocal section that I just basically want to treat the ensemble as a pad in the background, but that's going to have a big crescendo. I may have them on whole notes on a cluster chord that's going to crescendo. So I will start them on an ooh, ooh, ah, yeah, and just modify the vowel as I go through, depending on what the dynamic requirement is. And I'm a big fan of listening to a lot of pop and rock, like the old school Pink Floyd backing vocals, for example, because they're so fantastic and so theatrical. So you will find inspiration not just in musical theater. But again, just remember what the goal is in a particular moment. Are you amplifying the melody? Do you want the ensemble singing the same lyric to really make that lyric pop, or do you want them to just be humming? I will often also just have them on a closed which you should know is always going to be really hard to hear. So either if you're working with a sound designer, you may want to ask for help, or when you're in rehearsal, you can direct them to sing a closed but with a tiny little bit of air. So it's just so they have a little more center to the sound and it's a little more audible. So another thing with arranging for an entire score rather than just an individual song, something that I will often try to think about is how can my vocal arrangements incorporate themes from other songs? How can I help to unify this entire score? If a character has sung a song earlier in the show and then they come back and they have this little featured moment, or it's the climax of Act One and you want to show different characters. Can you grab from songs that they've sung previously and creating some counterpoint there? You don't always have to invent entirely new musical material. Draw from the score that's already there. And that's when counterpoint is really, really fun and so satisfying. And it's so great for the listeners to be able to recognize something and tie pieces together and realize that they're also on a satisfying musical journey. It's not just one song after another, after another, after another, but this is a complete work. Yeah, so just in thinking about, what is this arrangement trying to achieve? Also look for opportunities to use dissonance to create some tension. For example, you just have a very basic piano part where, so it's a 1-4-5 progression. How can you make that a little more musically interesting? Can you add a major 7 to the 1 chord and then have it resolve up to the 8? Can you add a moving part that's adding a 2nd and a 4th to give it a really pretty warm suspension? Things like that. Counterpoint will often add some dissonance too, but it's very satisfying when you as the arranger can be the one to really to modify a chord and to enhance a chord. One of the people I work with a lot, whom I adore, is Trey Anastasio, who is the lead singer of a band called Fish, and he wrote the musical Hands on a Hard Body. And he's a rock and roll guy. He's a guitarist, and he's an incredible musician. And he also sings and writes a lot of harmonies. But when we started working together, I would start to fill out the harmonies that he'd already started singing and started writing, and I would add all these suspensions. I would add some really nice rubs, some nice dissonances. And he was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? That's fantastic." I'm like, I literally just added a 2nd to the chord, dude. Like, but don't be afraid to play around and just add other little moments of color that you might love to listen to yourself. Because you want to be, I always find that as I'm writing a vocal arrangement, I want to listen to it, if that makes sense. It's not just going to be something that, okay, I do this and then, it'll be done. It's like, oh no, I want to listen to this. I want to be excited when I listen to this. Okay, so enough of my rambly lecture part. Let's look at some examples. So actually, I'm just going to ask, and Holly, tell me if this is okay, but if anyone has any questions up to this point, maybe it's a good idea to just jump in. I mean,
yeah, there's a few in the chat. If you want to answer just a couple of these, let's see.
Yeah, let's do that, because I don't want to, go way past
miss the moment.
if it's, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so a lot of this is about how many parts in the harmony. So one question is, are 6 choral parts the norm? One says writing for 4 parts. If you're writing for 4 parts, do you try to stick within a specific tessitura, or do you freely use the whole range? As far as just, building those. And I think then the next question was, if you don't write for basses, do you just write 3-part harmony? So there's a 6 versus 4 versus 3 parts. What can you speak to that?
They're all great, valid questions. So honestly, it may depend on who you are working with, and do you have an 18 voice ensemble, or do you have an 8 voice ensemble? My show Renaissance, I had a 6-person cast, and I wrote in 6 parts, because it was the example I'll share with you later, was a very ethereal, very dreamlike, very sort of otherworldly moment that I wanted to expand musically. Spelling bee, I think some of those, the example that I'm about to play, I think a lot of the time I wrote in three parts, and that's for several reasons. A lot of the cast members that I was working with hadn't done musicals before, so I didn't want to write 6 individual vocal lines because I didn't know if they'd be able to hold them. And it also goes back to what I was saying before: don't distract and detract from the melody. What is the style of this piece? Actually, we didn't talk about style, but be aware of the style of your music. If you're writing a rock and roll show, do you want to have 12 different vocal lines, that are doing some crazy counterpoint things? Or do you just want to have a really solid three-part backing vocal line where everything's just going to pop and be so dynamic? So know the style, and again, know what the composer is intending. So it honestly depends how many people you have. I'd say for a standard vocal arrangement, I would write for soprano, alto, tenor, baritone. Now, even within that arrangement, I may have tenors and baritones singing the same part, because when it comes to chord structure, I find that a 3-part chord structure is much more effective because everyone can sing a different note of the triad. You have to be careful once you start adding in that 4th, say, baritone part. It can start to feel bottom heavy unless you're adding some really cool dissonance. But for example, if you have everyone just singing on an F chord, I would have the sopranos sing a C, I'd have the altos an A, I'd have a tenors and an F, and then the options for my baritones would be below that a C, an A, or an F. Now, I would almost always put them on the F just because it gives it a much more rounded sound. It would feel lopsided to me if the baritones were singing an A because that's already been sung by the altos, or the C because that's already been sung by the sopranos. But an F, you have both guys' parts on Fs, you have this really solid foundation of an octave, an F octave, and then you have the ladies over the top of that bring out the 3rd and the 5th. That's the voicing that I would tend to go with in your sort of run-of-the-mill chord breakdown. Obviously, it depends how fancy you're wanting to get, and also you need to keep in mind the vocal, but I guess the skill level of your performers. You may have someone who can sing a high F, no worries. You may have someone who can't really hold a harmony, so you just want to give them the melody. So you also have to be aware of who you're working with. I think the basic rule, the rule of thumb, is to not overwrite. Don't be afraid of unison. Don't be afraid of 2-part chords. You may want the guys in unison on the bottom and the ladies in unison on the top. And then you're literally just having them move in thirds. And then maybe the guys move up and they're in seconds for a while, and then they drop back down, so they're in thirds. Often the simpler arrangements are the more effective because everyone can deliver them very powerfully together. So I'd say the standard vocal breakdown would be 4-part, but 3 is also very common. And then as you get fancier and fancier, the sky is the limit. If you have 18 voices, maybe you want to have 12 different parts going at once. Ingrid Michaelson will just, because she records her own vocal arrangements onto her demos, she'll just keep recording layer after layer after layer after layer after layer after layer, and they're gorgeous. They're just gorgeous. So it just depends on the style of music that you're going for.
Okay,
All
there's
right.
another, do
Yeah.
you want to keep going or do you
No,
want
no,
to
no, give
take
me
some
another
more?
one. Mhm.
Um, okay, this one's a little different and you may get to this later, but I'll go ahead and give it to you and then you can do what you want to with it. Stacy says, in terms of storytelling, what kinds of dramatic tropes are your vocal arrangements asked to convey, such as doo-wop or gospel harmonies? Are you ever given those kinds of parameters where, you have to follow that?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I don't know if I'm actually given them by a composer, but the score may dictate, not literally, but if you are okay, for example, in Hands on a Hard Body, which is the show that Trey Anastasio and Amanda Green wrote, I'm going to play an example from that in a bit, but not this one. There was a song in that show called Joy of the Lord, and it was a gospel number. Now, the whole musical was not written in a gospel style, but this number, I was literally called Joy of the Lord, and there was this big like stomp clap stomp clap stomp clap section. There was nothing else to do with the vocal arrangement except write this powerhouse gospel arrangement. um, and that it was super effective because that's unapologetically what it needed to be. um, Again, if it was a sort of a doo-wop thing, then I would think that it's something that's set in the 60s, or you're trying to get the feeling of that 1960s girl group sound. um, Again, just always talk with your composer or with yourself if you're the composer, like what do I want the audience to feel in this moment? Do I want them to be reminded of a Motown song? Do I want them to have a psychedelic flashback? Do I want them to do I want to transport them back to a movie musical, a 1930s movie musical number, and then think, okay, what are the different tricks that I can use to help take them there?
Okay, how about you just keep going?
All right, awesome. Well, on that note, speaking of Busby Berkeley and pastiche, this is one of the vocal arrangements I did from the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. It's a song called Magic Foot. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the show. It's very fun. It's very quirky. It's this wonderfully intimate 9-person musical about kids who are played by adults who go to a spelling bee. 6 of the 9 actors are playing children who I don't even know how old they are. I can't remember. They're meant to be young, like maybe 10, 11, 12 years old. And then the remaining 3 characters play adults. So right there, that information is telling me, okay, so 2/3 of this ensemble, and it was an ensemble show, a vocal ensemble show, 2/3 of the cast need to sound like kids. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to be putting on squeaky voices or anything, but you don't want to be writing like bass baritone parts, right? You will for the adults. You'll put the adults down there if they have that range. But you automatically have to think, okay, so not only are there vocal like sonic requirements, they need to sound like kids, but what are their oh, I totally lost my train of thought. I was going to say something about the ranges of these kids. Anyway, I'll come back to that. I was just checking through. Okay, right. So the people, a couple of the people who are in this original cast of this show hadn't done musicals before. So I was tasked with writing harmonies for people who didn't really know what harmonies were, didn't know how to sing harmonies. And the character who played William Barfay, Dan Fogler, who actually ended up winning a Tony for this role, he'd never really sung before. And so we discovered that when he started workshopping all of this material, that he had this voice like this. It was this like weird tenor voice. And that just meant that all of his vocal lines I had to write like up around the F, top of the tenor clef, the F note. And I would vary it a little bit, but for the most part, I would just give him like a monotonous harmony. And that really popped, and he would always nail it. But that's not something that you would give your like average theater tenor. He's going to kill you if you're just giving him F's or G's or you know, you need to give people breaks and take them in and out of the top part of their register. So know your cast, know their limitations. We also had this amazing singer, Lisa Howard, who could sing a high C. Now, I'm not going to give her a high C in every song. I'm going to give her one high C in the entire show. But you also couldn't just write that for anyone. You have to see if you have someone who is willing and able to pull that note out once a night, but 8 times a week, and they're going to be happy doing it. So I'm going to play this song. It is called Magic Foot. The premise is that this character, William Barfay, he was given a word to spell, and then instead of spelling it on his hand or spelling it in the air before he announced it at the microphone, he would spell it out on the ground on his foot. So William Finn wrote this great song called Magic Foot. And it was very clear as soon as Bill started writing it that it was going to be a big dance number. How could it not be? It's called Magic Foot. And it felt very much like a pastiche of a Busby Berkeley song, like a big razzle-dazzle 1930s number. So I didn't want to make it too complicated. I wanted to use a lot of thirds and sixths. I didn't want to add crazy dissonances. I knew that they would be doing choreography, and that's something else to keep in mind. Don't overwrite something if you know they're going to be dancing, because it's just gonna make everyone's life hard. I mean, you have to think about how much rehearsal time you have for something. And if you spend a week teaching them this crazy, amazing vocal arrangement, then you're going to spend another week on then learning the choreography. At the end of that choreography week, they're going to have forgotten the arrangement. It's what happens. People's brains it just takes a lot of work to do that, even with the professionals. So know what the choreographer has in mind. So I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to pull up the music, the sheet music, and let's just play along and scroll along. I'm gonna play from the beginning, and you'll hear my arrangement doesn't come in until halfway through, but you will hear what William Finn gave me. He gave me the melody, and he gave me very close to this accompaniment the very first time he played me the song. And then you'll hear later what I did to add the vocals back in, and then we'll go back and we can talk about some specific things. Okie dokie.
Magic foot, I bet.
Now watch this technique. He spells the word on the floor with his foot before speaking it aloud.
A magic foot, take me to the final round. A magic foot, I barely lifted off the ground. A magic foot, I do it without making a sound. A magic foot, right the ladder. A magic foot, perfect ladder, a magic foot. It's an alphabet way to spell. Okay, let's see what we got here, folks. H-A-S-E-N. Horses. P-F-E-F-F. Possess. E-R. Let's. A magic foot. Be specific, a magic foot. It's terrific if you're not specific, magic foot. I'm terrific when I make a word with my foot. Magic foot. Magic foot. Magic foot. Magic foot. Magic foot. Magic foot. Don't go kaput. Foot. Magic foot. Magic foot. Right the goddamn leg down. Magic foot. It's an alphabet way to spell. An alphabet way to
Okay, so there are many things that I look back at this and I'm like, oh, I would have done something differently there, or something different there. But overall, I still think it was a pretty effective number, and the choreography just made it so fun. Oh, it brought the house down every night, and this guy was such a great comedian. And there were 5 other actors playing little kids who were running behind as if they were in this 1930s Hollywood movie musical with their jazz hands and their high kicks. And so it was delightful. And that's the thing with working with Bill Finn is, first and foremost, I want to maintain his sense of joy in the music, and keep it fun. And you can have a sense of humor when you're a vocal arranger. Obviously use it when appropriate, but there are ways of getting laughs from your vocal arrangements. So I just want to go back and just talk through quickly, first of all, my mistakes. So I would never do this now, but look at how I notated this. I literally just wrote chorus. I didn't write down who was singing what part. It's all on one system. I mean, it's still clear what notes they're singing, but it just takes a lot longer in the rehearsal room because the music director has to say, okay, you sing this, you sing this, you sing this. Everyone has to write it in. Like, I mean, I could save the music director, 10 minutes by notating this a little more clearly. And also breaking it down into that way I showed you guys earlier, a soprano clef, a treble clef, and a tenor clef underneath. So it's very clear that the women are on the top line and the men on the bottom line. And in that case, I would have had these top 2 parts, the D and the B flat and the treble clef, and then I'd bring this part down and notate it in the tenor clef. And so all the men would have been singing magic foot, magic foot, magic foot. And then I would have split the magic foot would have been tenors, magic foot would have been baritones, and then obviously the ladies on top. So there just would have been a cleaner way to write this out. Anyway, we all learn, nobody died. It was a fun song. And I'm happy to answer those random Facebook messages that come in and say, who's meant to be singing this? So you will see that Bill Finn gave me this wonderful melodic line, which the section ends with, it's terrific when I make a word with my foot, magic foot. And then there's a 2-bar turnaround. And so as a vocal arranger, I'm like, okay, there's a clear opportunity for me to do something in here. Okay, why don't I repeat the phrase magic foot, magic foot? And I'm going to keep it. It's funny, ironically, I told you guys earlier, Bill said he hates block chords. This was one opportunity I had where it actually was perfect because stylistically, it's legitimate and it's accurate and authentic. So I had these block chords and I just had them repeat the phrase, magic foot, magic foot, magic foot. And then hopefully you heard, I didn't notate this in the score and I should have done, but you heard on the recording, they then all sang this magic foot. I put this crazy crescendo in there and a really weird vibrato. And that's something I worked out with the music director in the rehearsal room. But you wouldn't know that if you're looking at the score. You'd only know it if you listen to the cast album, which thankfully most people do. But again, you could write crazy vibrato. You could write big crescendo. You could even write in parentheses that the foot sound actually goes to what. You could change the vowel in there so it's super, super clear and specific. And again, so I didn't want to detract from this solo line. So that's why I have this whole note underneath. Magic foot. Okay, rather than magic foot, magic foot, magic foot, magic foot. Okay, so you still want to preserve your lead character. And I also just repeated this, magic foot. Again, magic foot, and then magic foot, just based on the chord progression here. So don't be afraid of repetition. And then I use this vowel that I don't use very often, but it felt so right for this moment. And it actually worked so well with the choreography. This I think at the time they're doing so it was a real collaboration between dance and music. And then we have this key change and this big run up, and it was almost like, you know, the big feathers were opening up. And so I had everyone continue on this unison line. I moved from the do vowel to the ah because it's a crescendo and it's the easiest way to get a big vocal sound. Ah, I literally just had them go up the scale. And then, because I still wanted it to be really powerful, I kept all the girls together, which again, I did not notate clearly, but I think it's pretty obvious. Magic foot. And then I have all the guys together, magic foot. Okay, so we just have this two-part counterpoint here. Same again, magic foot, magic foot. Everyone sings foot together. Magic foot, magic foot. So again, just little punctuations using the hook, the magic foot hook. And then actually this is an out of date score, but we ended up just repeating magic foot, magic foot, magic foot. Now I look at this and for the life of me, I don't know what the actual voicing would have been because clearly I didn't have all the guys singing a high C. So, you know, not the best way to notate a score. I probably had them singing down the octave. But you'll see for the most part, this vocal arrangement is a three-part vocal arrangement, which is stylistically authentic for this kind of big razzle-dazzle movie musical number. And also keep in mind that we had 6 people singing this song. So in essence, there were only 2 people in each part, and some of them were not trained singers. So I was trying to achieve all of those things with this vocal arrangement. So any questions about spelling bee or anything from that little doobie doo or anything from before?
Okay, yeah, let's take 2. 1, and I think I asked you this, but I moved on to something else. So this was a question that we wanted to get back to. Do you try to stick within a given tessitura? So,
Oh,
or do you use the whole range that you showed in your document that you showed?
It depends on the style of music. It honestly does. And it depends who I'm working with. And I, for the most part, know who I'm working with because I'm writing an arrangement for a workshop that I will then go into and be with these people. 6 months ago, I was in the room with these people, so I would know. Okay, this woman has a really, really strong belty B. Okay, so I'm gonna give her a lot of the big, strong harmonies. If I want something really powerful, I'm gonna give her her money note. Um,
Carmel, what if we're, really before we have a cast that they're not in workshops. This is like early
right,
people we're just writing, we're not going to have a cast for a
right,
long
right, right,
time.
right. I would say I would err on the side of being more conservative than more daring. Okay, just because you're gonna have a more effective arrangement if it sounds good. And if if you're writing, say, a choral arrangement, which you are then gonna license to different theaters or to churches or to choirs, you don't know what the ability level is. I'm not saying dumb down your arrangements, but don't don't try to be fancy just for the sake of being fancy. Don't write a bunch of high C's because not that many people can sing high C's really well, and it's not going to reflect well on the piece. It's not going to be a successful performance. So I try to keep within. I use that chart I showed you guys as my guidelines, and I very rarely will go out of that. I'm more conservative than anything. Like I don't, because I've just learned that even if most sopranos should be able to sing a really strong D or E, sometimes you're going to get someone who can't sing a D or E. So, all right, if I have the option of just having them sing a C really strongly, and then I'm going to give that crunch, the D or the E, voice it differently, maybe put that in the tenor part, then that's going to be the choice that I make. Just because, like I said, sometimes simple is the most effective.
Great. Okay, one more. When a show songs are published, say in piano vocal form, are you consulted on that published version of those vocal arrangements? To what degree are your parts condensed or rearranged by a publisher?
So I believe that the 2 or 3 shows that I've had my vocal arrangements published like this, I have been consulted, and that's what is so crazy about spelling bee. Because I mean, I was a baby, and I didn't have the wealth of experience behind me. Now, if I could go back and go through it and say, actually, you know what? Now I say that, I think that the score that I just shared with you from spelling bee is an out of date one. The I think the vocal selections and the published license score of spelling bee does have more information than that, but either way, this is not okay to give your music director and give your cast what I showed you. It's just not clear enough. So yeah, I've been lucky because I have been consulted, and I'm able to make sure that my work is being communicated in the right way.
Okay, I think that's all for now. You can keep going.
Okay, awesome. Now for something a little different. So this is a show called Hands on a Hard Body, which, as I said earlier, was written by Trey Anastasio and Amanda Green, and a book by Doug Wright. It was based on a documentary set in Texas about a contest that may still happen. I mean, Holly, you might know, you're in Texas. It's a contest where people stand next to a truck, okay, like a big SUV truck. And the last person to take their hands off wins the truck. And this contest will literally go on for like 5 or 6 days. And people can only take a break every hour for 5 minutes. And then I think every 4 hours you get a 20-minute break. So it's a crazy concept. It's a crazy concept in general. It's also a crazy concept for a musical. But these people decided to turn it into a show. And it's funny, there are actually a lot of similarities between Spelling Bee and Hands on a Hard Body, because it's a contest. It's a small ensemble cast. Everyone was on stage almost the entire show. And so I, as the vocal arranger, again, had this opportunity to write for a very varied group of people. Unlike Spelling Bee, Hands on a Hard Body had a lot of older actors and actresses who were, again, like varying levels of singing experience, very, very different voices. Keith Carradine, who's, this amazing old school actor and singer, he's a baritone, but at this point, his voice had dropped. And so he's like legitimately singing in a bass range. One of the women was Dale Souls, who's in Orange is the New Black. She's got a super raspy voice and she sings like this. And so as the vocal arranger, I'm like, okay, clearly I'm not going to be able to get these people to blend. That's not the point. But how am I going to write to their characters and continue, or how do I blend them when they need to blend if other characters are singing, for example, or how do I play to their strengths? How do I play to Keith's range? How do I play to Dale's very specific raspy sound? So there are a whole lot of other challenges on this show. One of the great vocalist on that show was Keala Settle, who you guys may have ended up seeing in the Greatest Showman movie. She was the bearded lady. She now tours with Hugh Jackman. She sang the gospel song and she was unbelievable. So I have this one woman who can literally sing anything. And then I have a couple other people who have great voices, but they're very limited. So I had to figure out how to write to people's strengths. So this arrangement I'm going to share is actually at the end of Act 1. It's Benny, who's the main character, who was played by Hunter Foster. And he had won the contest a couple of years earlier. And he was in it to win it again. So I think I'll just share and then press play and we'll do the same thing. Here we go. Now, actually, in the interest of time, I might start a little ways in because it's a power ballad. I'm going to see if I can just jump ahead with this track. We'll see.
Or the color of our skin. Cold sinner's perfect love. He's there for everyone. Don't you blame him for your sorrows. Better look at what you've done. I said, stop the Lord. My wife was walking out the door. I said, spare him, Lord. My child blew off the war. And I know that he was listening, 'cause I felt the chill wind blow. God answered my prayers. He said no. It's their deployment. My son started having nightmares, crying out in his sleep, scaring the hell out of his bunkmates. Uncle Sam gave an honorable discharge. Got his old room ready. Go welcome home and shoe polish from a front window. Not for his transfer, he took his M9 and turned it on himself.
just gonna
At
pause.
the edge
pause,
of
pause,
this
pause.
abyss.
All right. Can you guys see me? I'm not sure what happened. Okay. All right. I got it back. Hang on. Resume share. Okay, great. Sorry. Thumbs up. You guys are back, right? Or my music's back. So it's not a particularly complicated vocal arrangement, but it really packs, I think, an emotional punch, right? It was the end of Act One, like I said. The car, there was a literal car on stage, and it was like spinning around, and the lights were flashing. It was like this dream sequence, um, and and people are like trying not to fall asleep on this car, and there's such desperation, and the stakes are so high for all of these characters. And so I wanted to have that character, even though it's Benny's song, I also wanted to have a sense of these other characters who were singing with him. Um, and so where I start with this, whoa, 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 I wanted them to feel like sighs. I wanted it to feel like they're exhausted, and this is the only thing they could be singing after standing at this car for so long. And so you'll see it's 3 parts, so it's not particularly complicated. And I'm just using the vowel woe. And I did that intentionally because I wanted it to rhyme with no, but I wanted there to be a progression with it. So I knew I wanted to get to no, like the actual lyric being God answered my prayers and he said no. But I started with woe because it also feels like, 70s rock song. And actually my inspiration for this arrangement, which you probably heard later with Kayala singing that riff, was Pink Floyd's song Great Gig in the Sky. So once I have this build of woes and no's, still pretty chordal, because there was so much, you could hear that electric guitar soloing. I didn't need to compete with that. I knew it was just going to be this, the power in this was going to come from the repetition and that just gradually stepping up the register. Now this was a moment here, kneel down before him, where I thought, okay, I can really punctuate rhythmically by mirroring the vocal lines rather than la 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 la. I thought kneel down before him. I mean, there's such strong consonants that would be really effective and very powerful. Same with drown in your own pride. And I also I've used a lot of R's and O's and woes and open vowels. So it was a nice change to drop some lyrics in. Same here. And then I added this tiny little, like, I don't even want to call it a counterline, but like a little fill, I guess, little vocal fills. They're always fun to look for opportunities to do that. So this melody, Trey and Amanda had written, cost of your own soul. And then I thought, oh, well then, if these guys are rock singers, you'd go, whoa. And so I just modified it a little. Oh, all the ladies in unison and the guys on, oh. So they start unison and then they split, the men and the women split. But I went from this 3-part or 4 parts here down to 3-part and then just unison with a tiny split. So you see, I'm not getting too crazy in, like, I could have put the sopranos up on a high F sharp here, but I knew it'd be way more powerful in this rock belty place if they're singing C sharps. Same with here, they could just belt this. Everyone can belt cost of your own soul, oh, and then fortissimo, right? Now I could have done a high D here and a high E here and even a high G sharp here, but it would have sounded very, very different. It would have detracted from this Benny solo line. This just gives it this, there's a core sound, keeping it in this lower register here that still keeps it powerful, but allows the main solo line to pop over the top of that. some more oohs and ahs. And sometimes it's good just to vary them, and they're just random. It's like, what's less repetitive here, an ooh or an ah? Which way do we do it? Now here, you may have noticed that it's a 2-bar chord progression that just repeats over and over and over again. And so I'm not even sure if I remember, I think the car was spinning around and he was like having this breakdown, and there's nothing else out, there's no lyrics, there's no melody line. Like, this is all about the vocal arrangement. How do I get this like mental breakdown to happen just using voices? And so I kept the most of the ensemble on these sighs, on these cries. Oh, 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 just repeated them. It's just 3-part split. You'll see I repeated them in 2-bar phrases. So same there, same there. I thought, okay, things need to get a little more heightened, a little more interesting. So I added the 4th part and I kept the split, but I put the sopranos up a little higher. Oh, 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 oh. And then I repeated it because repetition is our friend. Okay. And then instead of doing the punctuated, oh, oh, I had them change to ah, 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 because it's super dramatic, right? And this is before we even put the Keala stuff on the top. We put the solo line. So, you know, I knew that Keala was going to have this feature, but I still wanted the ensemble to be contributing musically and emotionally to this whole transition. Okay, but then, as you heard, I'm sure, Kayla, who just has this powerhouse voice, and that's, you know, speaking of writing to people's special skills, like, she could riff till the cows come home and we would all just be staring with our mouths open. She's incredible. Like I said, my inspiration was the Pink Floyd song. So we listened to that together, and I notated little bits and little phrases here, which she stuck to, you know, half the time, and then she added her own embellishments too. But the whole point was for this, you know, you'll see, it's low. Oh, whoa, oh, oh. Okay, I didn't want to have her come out from the beginning and go, whoa, 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 because then we have nowhere to go. So I had this whole 16-bar section where it just had to be a crescendo over literally a 2-bar chord progression. And so that's when you have to look at big picture stuff and think, okay, how do I sustain vocalists through here? And then you hear her just start wailing, and it's fantastic. And then it just needed to come down, and it needed to answer, it needed to end. I wanted it to feel like it was ending in a prayer, the song being God answered my prayers. So, and then obviously he's singing to the Lord. And then the song ends with Hunter singing solo. So it didn't even end with any of the other vocalists, but I feel like the audience were taken on such a journey because they just got this raw emotion that all of those different vocal lines helped to convey. So that was Hands on a Hard Body, and that score was much more rock and roll than Spelling Bee. But you can see I still use a lot of the same tricks. I use actually those 3-part block chords, which sometimes I added a 4th part to. I used do's and oohs and ahs.
Carmel,
So,
I have a question about that.
yeah.
It looked like, and my husband, he might make a face, so it looked like in your accompaniment, in the piano part, that the vocal part was reflected a lot in what was happening in the piano. Did you write the vocal first, and then the piano was kind of done to match, like the vocal parts?
That's a really good question.
On the ahs and the oohs, like the movement look and the chord progression and the rhythm was very similar. So I was curious, did you write the vocal first or was the piano first?
I'm trying to remember. So the way that Trey Anastasio works, he's a rock musician. So he's not notating anything. He's like, notation, what's that? So I believe that all of these songs were written on guitar, just Trey and his guitar singing into a microphone. I actually came to this piece not at the very beginning. I took over from someone, so what I can't remember is if I got the piano parts fully notated. It may have been a little bit of both. I may have gotten them notated, and then I may have added, because I ended up playing the keyboard in the pit. But what, from the genesis of the actual song is that Trey was writing quarterly. So he was writing these guitar chords. He was writing F sharp major, A, E, G. So it was all, you could take the piano part away and just have a chord chart, and it would still be the same song that Trey wrote in his studio, 10 years ago. I wish I could remember. It was probably a little bit of both, actually. Yeah, and it depends. If you may be doing all of the jobs yourself, you may be writing out piano parts as well as vocal arrangements, or you may have someone doing both. But you do want to make sure you're having those conversations and not, making sure the pianist or the music assistant or who's ever writing the piano parts in is not overwriting your vocal arrangements. I've taught this class a couple times and I always run out of time. It's just crazy. So,
you're good. We can keep rolling.
Well, I want to get to all of the questions, because I'm sure you guys have some awesome questions. What I could do, if you guys are okay, what I'd love to do is just I'll play the very, very end of my own show, because it's a completely different kind of vocal arranging. And then, I'll definitely get to questions if you guys don't mind hanging on a little bit. If you have to jump off. So I wrote a show called Renaissance, and it was, I like to call it my arty-farty jukebox musical, because all of the song lyrics were poems by Edna St. Vincent Millay. So I was not writing for character, although ultimately I did, but I wrote the songs before I knew I was writing a musical. So once Dick Scanlon, my collaborator, my book writer and co-director, came on board, we had to figure out how to then move these songs around and help tell the story through these poems. But the very, very end of the piece was actually the title poem, which is Renaissance or Renaissance. And it is a 200 plus line poem that I ended up musicalizing. And that translated into being a 20-minute song. And it was 20 minutes of poetry. It was like one giant poem. And that was after 2 hours of a show where all the songs were poetry. So it was pretty risky. And all the audience ended up leaving their seats and coming up and sitting on stage. They were essentially stepping into this big dream sequence. So I'm just going to make it a very, very long story short. But the atmosphere that I was going for, or the experience that I wanted the audience to have, was one of being transported to another world. And I had 6 incredible vocalists and I knew their ranges, and I had the luxury of writing for them. So I was able to do things with their voices that I maybe wouldn't have done if I was just writing, at my desk for people that I didn't know. For example, that the Hands on a Hard Body arrangement that I just played, that's a pretty standard, those are standard ranges. And, besides the Kayala part of the crazy riffs, that vocal arrangement, you'd be able to get any group of singers to sing that and to get all of those dynamics and those, get those placements. For Renaissance, you'd have to cast specifically people who could sing these notes. So let me pull it up. I'm gonna have to skip way ahead. I'm actually thinking okay. Where should we jump in? Forgive me, I'm just gonna scroll through. I'll play it and then I'll just scroll. Okay, share screen. that's kind of close to where it'd be good to talk about. Let's just go back a little. It's 203 page score. Okay.
The wind blew up to me.
Here we go.
A sky grown clear and blue again.
And as I looked, a quickening gust of wind blew up to me and thrust into my face a miracle of orchard breath, and with the smell I know not how such things can be. I breathe my soul back into sprang I and held the earth with such a cry as is not heard, save from a man who has been dead and lives again. About the trees my arms I wound, like one gone mad I hugged the ground. I raised my quivering arms on high, I laughed and laughed into the sky. Strangling song caught fiercely, and a great heart throb sent instant tears into my eyes. Oh God, I cried, no dark disguise can e'er hereafter hide from me thy radiant identity.
Okay, so it's a snippet, just a snippet of the little 20-minute finale. But you'll see. I mean, I think I employed a lot of the different techniques that we've talked about in this whole section. So where'd it go? Come back. There it is. So look, I'm marking things up so much more clearly now in my old age. I'm splitting things. I'm not just writing unison. I'm actually being very specific. Even though it's an octave split, I'm writing out those octaves. I wanted the solo line here to pop, but so I thought a block vocal chord underneath this little section would work. And I was talking about colors and word painting earlier. So the lyric here, the poem is, and as I looked, a quickening gust of wind blew up to me and thrust into my face a miracle. So I wanted to have the ensemble sound like a gust of wind. So I have them on who, and I made sure it was who, not ooh. So tiny little details like that make a difference. Then I knew, this is one of my favorite lines in the whole poem. I know not how such things can be. I breathed my soul back into me. Okay, so that's a very big emotional moment. And so I had everyone going from these low who's, these breathy who's, to sing unison. I breathe my soul back into me. And then I had them split. I keep the ladies together, so there's still punch, because there are these three women. I had 3 women and 3 men in the show. 3 women still on this like very solid G. Then I had the guys jump up, back into me. Ah. Okay. Then you'll see that this is just thirds. Okay. Ladies are on a G, guys are on an E. And then I keep them in thirds. Up then from the ground sprang I and hailed the earth with such a cry. So super simple, but it was so effective because you had these Michael Starobin in these stunning orchestrations. It was just there was so much power that came from this moment. It's ladies in unison, men in unison, just happened to have them singing in very powerful parts of their registers. Like in Hands on a Hard Body, I could have had the women sing, up then from the ground sprang I, but I didn't want that. I wanted up then from the ground sprang I. I wanted to tell a story and to be a visual as well as a sonic experience. Yeah. So anyway, it's past time. I mean, you guys feel free to listen to any of those examples. They're all on Spotify. Just know, I mean, there really are no wrong answers. What you can do is learn about voicings by studying, like old classical music. There is definitely value in looking at voice leading and harmony. But I think the best measure is your own ears. Okay, and trust your musical instincts, and don't be afraid to put your own creative stamp on a vocal arrangement. I'm sure there are a bunch of questions I see in the chat. There are a few, but Holly, feel free to.
Yeah. We'll look at these two, and then I'll let people just maybe voice some. So one says, do you regularly write men's parts in treble clef?
Sorry, did you say men's parts?
Men's parts,
Men's
yes.
parts. I write in tenor clef. If the only reason that I would have written something in that, maybe in treble clef, is if it was two women singing and the guy's part like fills out the third part of a triad, so it's just easier to read on piano. But I almost always will write the guy's parts in tenor clef.
Okay. Scroll back up through here. I think I think that's all in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, that you can just wave and just pop your camera, your audio on, and we'll just let you ask live. So does anybody have anything they thought of? Sam, yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, Sam.
Hi. I saw Renaissance twice and loved it to pieces.
Oh.
And actually, I saw the measure number of my favorite measure of the show, and I'm so glad I know the measure number now, which is 500, which is like the cluster chord on Sky. When I heard that, it just like changed my world. It was the most powerful chord I think I have like ever heard. Brilliant. But my question, so when you were working on Renaissance, I couldn't like imagine it without those vocal arrangements. Did you write them at the same time as you're writing the songs themselves, or was it something you did after?
I did them after.
Yeah,
I did them after. I guess for Renaissance, for the big 20-minute song, I knew that it would be everyone singing, and I wrote that. That was one of the last songs I wrote for the whole show. So I think I subconsciously knew that I would be breaking parts down in different ways. And a lot of, I knew that that would be a vocal arrangement heavy part of the show. But for everything else, I wrote melodies first.
Hi, it was
Hi,
a great
David.
presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank
How
you.
much time do you have to write these arrangements? Because it sounds like the show is in rehearsal and you're writing arrangements. How does that fit in?
It's good question, and it all depends, what the timeline of the piece is. I'm usually given, say if it's a full length production that we're going into rehearsals for an actual production, I will be involved pretty early on, so I will have several months to get the whole score together. And often now all of my work comes sort of as under the umbrella of music supervisor. So I'm not just doing vocal arrangements, but I'm also doing maybe the piano arrangements, maybe a little bit of orchestrating. So I'm sort of working to put the whole score together. But I have to say, I've been asked to do things pretty quickly, and often a new song will come in if it's a new musical. Like Ingrid Michaelson, for example, will write a new brilliant song on our lunch break, and she'll want to teach it to the cast the next day. So I'll have to go home and write a vocal arrangement that night. But I feel like if it's a well-written song, then quite often you just have to follow the song's lead.
And do you have perfect pitch?
I do, but it's slipping. It's slipping. And everyone I know who, as they get older, it gradually goes away. I think, I'm not playing piano all day, every day, the way I did when I was a kid and a teenager.
Yeah, Julie, jump in.
Sorry, microphone. Do you ever collaborate with the orchestrator to come up with like textures if you're just sort of filling in oohs and things like that?
That's a great question. Usually the orchestrator comes in towards the end of the process. And that's really, it's a practical and a financial reason. The orchestrator doesn't want to be making changes because they're very costly to implement. So you will usually complete the piano vocal score with the vocal arrangement before you're handing it over to the orchestrator. Having said that, I mean, if you're working with a great orchestrator, and Michael Sterben is like my guy, one of my guys, we will be in rehearsal and he will email things back and forth to me and say, oh, I'm thinking about doing this in this measure, but I don't want it to cover up your vocal arrangement, and he might suggest, because he's a great musician and composer and arranger himself, he'd say, oh, what if you invert this so it's not clashing with this oboe line? And so, it's great to have those conversations, but for the most part, you've done 90% of the vocal arrangement before the orchestrator joins.
Cool, thanks.
Carmel, thank you so much for the brilliant education and your amazing talent that you're sharing with us. And we just appreciate the time that you took to answer our questions. So if everybody will just give her a little round of applause. Thank you.
It's an alphabet way to